Thank. Okay. So first of all, um, are there any questions about what we're gonna do a little recap. But first I want to see, are there any questions from what we went over last week and how to go memorizing the confidentiality, limits of confidentiality, all that stuff. You might not have it memorized yet. You can read it. All right. But we're gonna practice it. We're gonna practice it. So, okay. All right, so let's do a little recap and then we'll move forward with what we're gonna be doing for the rest of the tape. And then we're gonna practice. All right. Rhonda, did you have
Yes. Can you tell
next
me
time just yell out. Yell
I
out you got a question because I can't see you
can't
while
see
I'm
it.
sharing the screen.
No problem. Can you let me know where I can find that to memorize it? I don't recall you mentioning that last week.
I would imagine it's in the notes.
I mean,
Let's see. I mean, I did go over it in the lecture.
okay,
But
you
let's
said that
see,
we
let's
needed
see if
to
it's in the
memorize it,
notes.
but I didn't find the exact text that we should be memorizing, and maybe I missed it.
Um, well, I mean, yeah, I mean, it's not on this because if you use the checklist and refer to it, I don't want you reading it in a session. So it is not on the checklist, but basically, I just had it memorized and kind of went over it in the lecture, which is recorded. But let me see if it's in the notes.
It
Hey,
is
it's in the
attached to
notes.
it's in the syllabus too.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yep. Does anybody remember what I would add to this? What's the part that a lot of people add now that's newer?
Abuse.
Abuse, that's right. So if I feel you're a harm to yourself, to others, or in harm's way, I'll break confidentiality to ensure your safety. That technically covers abuse because you would be in harm's way. But now most textbooks add one after this to include if I feel as though you're experiencing abuse or abusing another individual, I'll have to break confidentiality for your safety and the safety of others. Okay, and the reason they do that is if you're counseling children or the elderly or basically anybody, but really what got that started was children or the elderly. Yeah. So you can either memorize it as I have it and say, oh, that includes it, or your agency that you might be working for may want you to add the abuse one. So you can do it either way. I don't care. Uh, but I'm just telling you, kind of what people add to it now. Legally, this is acceptable.
Can you restate that one more time with the abuse?
If I feel as though you're in an abusive situation or abusing others, I'll need to break confidentiality to ensure your safety and the safety of others. I'm recording it, don't worry. All right. So now we're going back to our checklist and the syllabus. Okay. So basically, we talked about the memorized part last week. Okay, so we talked about basic things like body language, vocal tonality, having a safe environment, a comfortable setting. Remember, being safe and having a comfortable setting does not mean that the client is going to feel comfortable. I don't want the client to feel comfortable. I want them to feel safe, and I want the setting to be safe and comfortable. If the client's comfortable, they're not growing. So anxiety issues, they are uncomfortable. But if we have a trusting relationship, if we have an environment that the client feels safe, then they'll feel safe enough to share their issue and to process it in counseling. But that is not a comfortable thing. Okay. So just to recap, and you're going to practice this part later tonight with a partner. So we're going to introduce ourselves, and remember, we're not going to ask, how are you doing? Because they could bring up something that breaks the limits of confidentiality, that is a limit of confidentiality. And we haven't gone over that yet. So we're going to introduce ourselves. Hey, I'm Grafton. What would you like to be called? Because the name on their file may not be what they'd like to be called. So I don't assume anything. I'll call them whatever they want me to call them. You know, I've had many people want to be called a different name. You know, it might have to do with gender, or it might have to do with whatever, but I'll respect whatever their preference is. They might have a nickname. They might have a traumatic experience tied to their legal name. So I'm just going to say, what would you like to be called? And that's what I will call them. Now, here's what I normally do. Number one, to help me to remember their name. Number two, to show them that I've heard them and I'm present and I'm listening. I say, hey, I'm Grafton. What would you like to be called? They might say, hey, I'm Mike. Nice to meet you. I say, hi, Mike. I always repeat their name. That helps me to remember it. It lets them know that I'm present for them, that I'm listening to them. And it's just a nice way to introduce yourself, to use their name. Just an extension on that. Let's say somebody brings up another person, a child or a significant other or a friend or somebody they reference, somebody who's passed away. They bring up somebody else in the session. I don't say, you know, your significant other, your father, I use their name. That brings them into the present session. So anybody else who's brought up in the session, I also use their name. So if they say my significant other, that's very formal, say, what do you normally call them? And they don't have to if they don't want to give me their whole name, they don't have to. But unless it's a very unique name, the first name is usually not going to break any type of confidentiality or anything like that. And if they don't want to, they'll tell me. That's okay. Okay. In the assessment, and you're not going to do an assessment, you know, but usually in the assessment, we go through everything about, you know, sexuality, identity, anything like that. So we're going to get very detailed, and you'll learn all about that in the DSM class. So they'll normally disclose all of that in an assessment. So I personally don't need to ask about pronouns. Pronouns, remember, a pronoun is about how we refer to somebody. It's not when I'm talking to somebody. So it's when we talk about somebody. But we designate pronouns to let people know identity, preferences, whatever. And we're going to get that in the assessment. However, if it's important to you, go ahead and ask. You know, there's nothing wrong with asking. We're just going to, in DSM, we're just going to go into great detail in all of those subjects. So we're going to know all the details after the assessment process. But if it's part of, you know, what you want to do in this process, you can ask about pronouns. So it's totally up to you for this class. But we're going to get into a lot more detail in DSM. You'll know all about the individual. Okay. So we introduce ourselves, we ask them who they are, we repeat it, ask pronouns if you want, and then we say, have a seat, you know? And, but I don't say, how you doing? Make yourself comfortable, nothing like that. Okay. And then I go over confidentiality, the limits of confidentiality. I ask, do you have any questions about that? Now, remember, normally we're going to have paper that they can, you know, I'll give them a copy, I'll keep a copy, they're going to sign that we reviewed confidentiality and limits of confidentiality. But sometimes I might be in a situation, like maybe I'm called out on an emergency. I'm not going to have that piece of paper with me. So that's why we're memorizing them, so that we can share that with the client, even if I'm on an emergency call, or copier broke down, I'm out of the papers. So we're going to know them anyway. Okay, so we go over confidentiality, limits of confidentiality. And remember, even though none of us are minors, I still go over the limit of confidentiality that involves minors. If your parent or guardian requests the records, I am required to release them, and then I add my own part. I usually say, but I'm going to ask those individuals, for that individual to work with me, to respect our trusting relationship, and you know, things like that. So I'm going to do my best to protect the client's confidentiality. But legally, if they really push for it, I'm going to have to release the records. So, but the reason I say it, even if I'm with an adult, is I might work with adults for 2 months straight, and then I get a minor. And I don't want to forget that part. I don't want to get so used to not saying it that I forget it. So I just say it to keep it fresh, to keep it memorized. So if I'm with an adult, I say, I know that you're an adult, but if you were a minor, blah, blah, blah. Okay, that's just so I don't forget it. All right, so that's confidentiality and limits of confidentiality, and you need to memorize this for your tape, but not for practice. Okay, all right, and then we're going to talk about the counseling process a little bit. This is referred to as the analytical framework. Say, oh, we're going to try to meet at the same time, same place every week. You know, we're going to have kind of the same routine in counseling. I'll kind of ask you how the week's been since we last talked. If there's anything that we should talk about immediately, if there's an emergency or something pressing. I don't want to wait till the end of the session. And because a lot of times people will wait to bring something important up because they're feeling anxious about it. And if they bring it up at the end of the session, our time's up. And, you know, even though, oh, they finally brought it up, then they're going to want to talk about it, but we're out of time. And we're not out of time because I'm stingy with time. It's because I got another client and I want to respect their time. So, you know, if they have something important or something pressing, I just remind them to bring it up at the beginning. Then basically, I let them know that 5 minutes before the end of the session, I'll let them know that our time's almost up and we'll be wrapping up. And then I usually summarize what's in the session, what we talked about, what I thought the main points were. I asked the client if there's anything I missed, anything that they thought was important that I missed. And then after we see each other for a few weeks, sometimes I ask them to summarize what they thought was important in the session. It might be different than what I thought was important. I usually bring up my personal philosophy and what theory I use. You don't have to do that for this tape unless you want to, but I'm going to share it with you anyway. My philosophy of counseling is that we're both equals. I just happen to have some special training in this area so that I can better help you. But I'm sure you have expertise and knowledge in other areas of life that I don't. But as human beings, we're equals in this environment. And I think I'm going to learn just as much from you as you're going to learn from me. I think we'll both grow as a result of this counseling experience. And so that's my philosophy. And then my theory is I'm personally an existential theorist. And I think that all counseling is really talking about life and what's the meaning of life? What's our purpose in life? What's important to us? And if we don't have that meaning, we're going to feel lost and anxious. So ultimately, you know, I think that's kind of what we're each searching for as human beings. And, you know, we have struggles along the way. I think every individual has some struggles and we can work together to process those so that, you know, we can have a more positive lifestyle. A lot of times things block us from finding our personal meaning and purpose in life, and they result in anxiety or depression or other issues. And we can work through those struggles together in a trusting relationship. So that's my philosophy and my theory. You can make yours whatever you want or skip it right now. You're going to go over, when you take theories class, you're going to write a paper on your personal theory. So it's okay. It's up to you whether you include that now or not. Okay. The next thing is basically, usually it's in the paperwork, but we usually ask, have you had any experience in counseling? And, the answer is always ultimately the same. I hope you have a positive experience in our counseling sessions. But if they say, yes, I was in counseling and it was a horrible experience, you said, well, I'm sorry to hear that. I hope you have a more positive experience now. Yes, I was in counseling and it was fantastic. That's great. I hope you have just as positive of an experience here. I've never been in counseling before. Wow, I commend you on your courage to come to counseling now, and I hope it's a positive experience for you. So you get the gist. We're hoping for a positive counseling experience for the individual. That's the gist of it. But it helps me to kind of know what their experience is. Some people have been in a lot of therapy, so they know all kinds of techniques and theories, and they've done some processing. And it's important to kind of know what their understanding of the process is, or if they've experienced, maybe they've only gone to CBT, sessions. Well, this might be very different. Okay. So, we find that's the memorized part. Okay. Now, like I said, you're either going to be comfortable with the memorized part, or you're going to be a little uncomfortable with it. Depends on your personality. If you're comfortable with the memorized part, you might be less comfortable with the techniques and skills, because you don't know what the client's going to say. If you're uncomfortable with the memorized part, you might be more comfortable with the skills and techniques. So I'm always more comfortable with the skills and techniques. Because I just like, I guess, spontaneity. Okay. So questions about the memorized portion.
Is it rude to in general take notes? I'm just curious, when people do counseling, let's say they do have a name that's really unique and you're like, I have no idea how to spell that. Or I'm just curious what your experience is during that memorized part, if they bring up something like a question that you don't know how to answer, or I don't know.
So I take notes when I do an assessment. And that's because they're going to bring up things like medications, previous diagnoses, illnesses, things like that. So you're going to have all of that information written down. And I usually say during the assessment, and this is a DSM class, I'm usually going to say during the intake assessment that I'm going to take notes because we're going to go through a lot of information. And I don't want to forget. I want to get everything right. And especially things like medications or diagnoses or things like that. But after this, I'm not going to take notes unless there's something really specific that I think, I need to write down. Because I want to be present for the client. And, I think it takes practice remembering everything, especially if you're running groups and you're running 4 to 5 groups each day of 8 people. And you're doing, so at the hospital, I do 29 notes a day. And I don't take any notes. And they're very specific. And I have to remember what they say from day to day, from week to week, so that I can make connections. Somebody brings up something 2 weeks. I need to be able to connect it to something they said 2 weeks ago. So yeah, you need to remember stuff. So if it's a 50-minute session, you'll have 10 minutes for notes. That's called a counseling hour. So if you see everybody on the hour, you'll have 10 minutes to take notes after the session. If you run groups, I usually run a group and then if I have 8 to 10 people in the group, it takes about 10 minutes per person, but I usually get it done in under an hour. So every other hour I run a group, not every hour. What else? All right. So that's the memorized part. The next thing we're going to talk about is the skills and techniques. And you have to memorize the skills and techniques, but really you don't know what the client's going to say. So you can't rehearse how you're going to use the skill or technique because everybody's going to say something different. So my view of therapy really does mesh with my philosophy. And I really do believe that we're not talking about problems. We're not problem solving. We really are talking about life. And that's why it's so important for, like, these just aren't classes. Theories isn't just a class. You're dealing with human beings with real issues. And you need to be able to use those theories and techniques and skills to be able to help those individuals. This is not problem solving or time management or, so it's really important that you know your theories, that you know your skills and techniques, that you know your group theory, so that whatever a client brings up, you'll be able to respond in a therapeutic way. So I talked a little bit about this last week, and I just want to talk a little bit about my personal growth as a counselor because my largest fear was, oh, I don't want to hurt anybody and I don't want to miss something that they might get hurt or hurt themselves. That's everybody's primary fear. And so there is going to be a time when one of your clients does get hurt or does hurt themselves or does relapse in addiction. And, it's going to happen. I don't want any of you to have any regrets or to question what you've done as a therapist when that happens. And so when that happens, you just want to be able to say, yeah, I did everything I could as a therapist. I went through the whole checklist and, I was very worried about that. And as people should be, as therapists should be. But I think, as long as you go through, all of the checklists. So let me give you an example. So might get a client unexpectedly. Nobody, it's an emergency. Nobody's available to take them on as a client. One of your clients canceled or no-showed, so you get them. Okay. You find out that, they're have a diagnosis of schizophrenia. They stop taking their meds, and that's why they're in crisis. They don't have any refills. You've got a birthday party after work. Everybody's waiting for you. And hey, you're going to miss it. That's life. You're going to miss it. You're going to call them, let them know, and you're going to stay with the client until they can get some more meds and be safe. So, it's things like that. You have to have priorities, and you have to go through the list of what you need to do in order to keep that client safe. And oftentimes you're going to be there forever. So, and there's countless instances like that where you just have to resolve yourself that this is the life of a therapist, and this person's welfare is more important than whatever else is going on. So that was my first fear, and that's everybody's fear. My second fear was, what if I run out of things to say and I'm sitting there for 45 minutes with this person with nothing to say? So when I was a student in practicum, I over prepared for every session, and I had a plan going into that session, and I had lots to talk about. But I ended up doing all the talking. I ran that session. It was therapeutic no matter what. But you know what? That fear of failure, that fear of not knowing what to say, was actually leading to too much control. And you're not going to have those magic experiences in therapy with a client, those aha moments, unless you give up control. And that's a scary thing to do, especially if you need control in your life because you fear failure, which I did. So I was very successful because I feared failure so much. So everything changed when I learned to give up control in therapy and give the control to the client. But the only way you can give up control in therapy is if you know your theories and you know your skills, so that no matter what the client brings up, you'll be able to respond. But it won't be a planned, written out response. It'll be a natural, genuine response, because you'll know enough theory and techniques and skills that no matter what the client brings up, you'll be able to respond. And if you don't know, if you don't have training to respond, so let's say they have a diagnosis that you're not trained to deal with. So I had a client, and I was still in school, and they gave me a client who I discovered had an eating disorder. Well, I had DSM, but I didn't have any extensive training in treating eating disorders. And I knew that eating disorders could be fatal. So I didn't want to, harm the client or not be able to help the client. So I saw my supervisor, and this is why you have supervisors, both on campus and on the site. And I told the supervisor my concerns, I have all the classes, but I don't have any specialized training in this. And so I had a great supervisor, and she said, well, I'll give you some choices. You can refer the client, but she didn't recommend that, that she saw this as a learning experience. And if I had enough supervision and training, I can learn as I work with the client. And so every week we met and we talked about the case, and she taught me about how to treat eating disorders. It was a fantastic learning experience. So you have to be honest with your own limitations, and you have to get the supervision. But other than that, sometimes a client would say something, I'm honest with them. Just like if a student, if one of you asks me a question and I don't know the answer, I'm not going to make something up. I'm not going to give you some BS. I'm going to say, I don't know. And, but you know what? I'll do my best to find out. And we'll both learn from that question or whatever point was brought up. So we're all human. We can't know everything, but we can still give up control to the client. We also have to be prepared. We got to know our theories, our skills, so that we can respond to the client. So I just want to share that giving up control in a counseling session also changed my life. Because if I needed control in a counseling session, I probably needed to maintain control in all my relationships. And that's because I feared not only failure, but rejection. So if I controlled work, if I controlled a relationship, then I could prevent failure at work. I could prevent rejection in a relationship, but it was never just freedom, freedom for the other individuals, freedom for me, spontaneity, and the unexpected. And that's where the joy of therapy and all relationships really comes in, learning and growing and, experiencing the unexpected. So I think giving up control in counseling helped me to give up control in all other areas of my life. And it really changed all my relationships, including the relationship I have with myself. Because in order to give up control, I had to understand that I'm only human. And even if I do fail, it's okay. I can learn from failure. I can grow from mistakes. And you know what? I still deserve unconditional love and positive regard, even if I fail. Why? Because everybody deserves that. Unfortunately, so many individuals grow up thinking that they have to meet other people's expectations in order to be accepted and loved. And that's why they fear rejection, or they try to please others, or they don't accept themselves unconditionally. So, believe it or not, I think that's what most people's biggest challenge in this class is: giving up control and learning how to respond naturally using these basic skills and techniques. So, getting back to the skills and techniques, skills and techniques in this class are primarily based on Carl Rogers' person-centered theory, which is perfect for giving up control because, Carl Rogers was like Fred Rogers, he accepted everybody unconditionally, and, he had accurate empathic understanding, and, I think he was a genuine person, So those are the three primary aspects of person-centered theory: accurate empathic understanding, unconditional positive regard for others, and being a genuine individual in therapy. So, I think that it's the perfect theory for this class, because no matter what other theories you're going to end up using in skills and techniques or in your job, you're always going to begin with person-centered, because you want to build trust with the client. I may have a client that I've never experienced whatever their culture is. And by culture, it's not just, race or, ethnicity or where they came from. It's more like diversity, and diversity includes everything, includes age and, sexuality and, such a broad range of things. So, I may not have any experience with this a population or but I'll let them know that, and I'll say, but if you're willing, we're going to work on building a trusting relationship, and hopefully we'll have a really positive experience, and we'll both grow from this experience. So by using these techniques, you'll build a trusting relationship with the client. And, I think that's the beginning of all therapy. So when you go in your practicum or when you go in your clinical field, you can use this with every client. That's the beauty of skills and techniques. You may be into CBT, you still need to build trust with the client. So I think that's kind of the foundational thing as human beings, building trust with one another. All right. So when a client shares why they came to therapy, so what brought you to therapy? That's the question you're going to ask after the memorized part. And you don't know what they're going to say. 9 times out of 10, they're going to give you a presenting problem that is situational rather than a deeper issue. So for instance, they might say, well, I'm having a relationship problem with my significant other and they, okay? So who are they automatically talking about? Their significant other. So their significant other is not in therapy. So the first thing I'm going to do is focus on the client. I'm going to acknowledge what they said, but I'm going to always refocus back on the client. People love talking about other people, but as long as they're talking about somebody else, they're not talking about themselves. So they're the only person in therapy. All right. So, the first thing we have to think of is when they share why they came to therapy. Is that a deep issue or is it kind of a surface issue or a situational issue? And there's ways to figure that out. So, we're going to begin to ask questions silently in the back of our mind. Is that a situation? If they change the situation, would they be okay? So for instance, somebody might bring up a problem with their boss at work. Oh, if they got a new job, would they need therapy? So that's a situation if the answer is yes. So change the situation, problem solved. But most of the time, it's not the situation. The person thinks it's the situation. But in reality, there's a theme. And they have this problem in other jobs. They have this problem with other individuals. They have this problem in relationships. But they think it's just this one situation. Oh, if I only had a different boss, my life would be great. Probably not. So, sometimes it's the other person's problem. Then why are you in therapy? I can't change the other person. That's a big mistake people try to make, changing other people. Oh, I'm going to enter this relationship. I'll help them change. It'll be great. No, it won't. You can only change yourself. So these are the first questions I begin to ask myself, because we have to figure out, is this an individual issue or is it just a situation? So a lot of times people will bring up a surface issue that is a symptom of a deeper issue. And new counselors fall for that. And they'll run with whatever they bring up. Oh, I had an argument with my significant other. And so they can spend the whole session talking about that argument. They might even help to solve the problem. Next week, a different issue, a different symptom's going to arise, a new argument, maybe with their significant other, maybe with somebody else. But that's because we never address the deeper issue. Symptoms are going to keep recurring unless we take care of the deeper issue. So the first thing we have to do is find the deeper issue. And once we find it, we have to stay with it. So how do we do that? Well, we use basic skills and techniques to find a deeper feeling connected with whatever they brought up. Once we find that feeling, every feeling is connected with an issue. So we always focus on feelings. And then that leads us to deeper issues. The deeper the feeling, the deeper the issue we get to. So there's secondary emotions, and then there's deeper emotions leading to a primary emotion. People like to talk about secondary emotions because they're not as anxiety producing. I can't give you a list of secondary emotions. It's just something we have to kind of work through because there's 1,000 emotions. So I'm just going to give you examples. An example of a secondary emotion is anger. Anger is the result of a deeper feeling. It's an emotion we display. It's a release. It's a venting. But it's usually the result of some deeper feeling, a feeling that I've been treated unjustly, that I've experienced prejudice or bias, that I've been betrayed in some way, so that I've been hurt in some way. So there's so many feelings that result in anger. It could be anxiety. I'm feeling worried. I'm feeling overwhelmed. Oh, so you're feeling overwhelmed. What's another feeling connected with that? What other feelings are you experiencing when you're feeling overwhelmed? Well, whenever I'm feeling overwhelmed, I worry, I get anxious, I'm worried about class, I'm worried about this crazy guy Grafton, who's the professor. How's he going to view my tapes? And, okay, so you're feeling worried. And eventually we connect feeling worried with the experience of anxiety. Anxiety is getting a little deeper there. I can tell you just from experience, as we move down the ladder of emotions, that the root of anxiety is the fear of something. And it's usually the fear of failing. And people feel failure because if I fail, I don't meet other people's expectations, and then I'll be rejected. So, yeah. All right, so those are kind of examples. So no matter what, we want to get to a feeling. And we don't move on in a session until we get to a feeling. People don't like to talk about feelings because feeling, unless it's like a really surface feeling, oh, I was so mad. People will give you like 20 secondary emotions until they get to a deeper emotion. You're going to want to move on. Don't move on. You have to get to a deeper emotion. And sometimes I say, you've mentioned a lot of feelings, but they're all kind of like surface feelings. Deeper emotions create discomfort. They're tough to talk about, but I'd like to go there with you. Let's talk about some deeper emotions that are connected with that. Sometimes you just have to say that if the client's not getting any deeper. Then you're going to think, oh, okay, I got to the deep emotion. Grafton's going to be happy. Let's move on. Now, once you get to a deep emotion, you have to stay there. And you're going to be uncomfortable staying with the client's deeper emotion as well at first. So, all right, let's talk about the skills and techniques that you're going to use for the first tape. So let's see what's on here. You don't have to, remember I said you don't have to do the assessment because that's covered in DSM. So, we're gonna go right here. We did the introduction, names, confidentiality and limits. The role of the counselor is kind of what's the session gonna look like? It's kind of what I believe. Unstructured invitation, what brought you here to counseling? Reflection of feeling. So reflection is the first skill. So client brings up an issue. You're going to reflect that issue. Oh, I had an argument with my spouse and it was really bad. And I decided I needed to come to counseling. There's no feeling there. But I'm going to reflect, wow, you had an argument with your spouse that was so bad you decided you needed to come to counseling. How do you feel about that? Yeah. So you're going to bring them into the feeling realm. So if they're just giving you situations, had an argument with my spouse, it was really bad, thought I needed to come to counseling. They're staying in the cognitive realm, because staying in a thinking realm stays away from feelings, which are not comfortable. Most people want to be cognitive, not feeling. So I'm going to reflect what they said. I'm going to ask them about a feeling. Then when they say the feeling, how did that feel? Well, I felt hurt. I felt belittled. I cried. I was worried that we weren't going to stay together. I thought, that it might end the relationship. So then you're going to reflect those feelings. Wow, you were feeling belittled. Let's unpack that word, belittled. What does that mean to you, feeling wise? What feelings are connected with that? You also said that you felt like the relationship might end. Well, the relationship might end. How do you feel about losing the relationship? So the relationship might end. They say, oh, I felt the relationship might end. No, they thought the relationship might end. They didn't share a feeling. So always come back to the feeling. So reflection is short. It's a few words, and it always directs you to feelings. All right. So we're down to reflection of feeling, body language, comfort. You're going to do that automatically. Paraphrase. Reflection is short, and it always gets you to a feeling. Paraphrase is like paragraph. It's longer. So do not move to paraphrase until you get to a feeling. Stay with that reflection until you get to a deeper feeling. And that might take a while. It's going to feel like forever. It's going to feel like your client's not cooperating. But hey, your client's going to be another student, so they know they need to get to a feeling. Help your partner out a little bit. So once you get there, you're going to move to a longer dialogue. Oh, let's draw out a narrative. Can you tell me a story about the last time you felt that deeper feeling? And then once they share a story, then you can paraphrase. Wow, thank you for sharing that experience with me. I know it was difficult. And then you paraphrase what they shared. So remember, paraphrase is longer. It's like a paragraph. Best way to get a paraphrase is asking them for an example, a story, something like that, but always include the feeling. Okay. The next thing is acknowledgement and clarification. Clarification is making sure that you really understand what they're sharing with you. You're going to clarify. I want to make sure that I understand everything that you're sharing. So you feel this way, and this way when this, and this happen. And on a deeper level, you have these feelings. So you want to make sure I want to make sure I'm on the right track. Please tell me if I'm off track. So you kind of want to check in with the client. Am I on the right track here? Is this how you're really feeling? Is this where we need to go? Am I accurate here? So you're kind of checking in. Okay, we did the reflection, we found a feeling, we did a story, we paraphrased. Am I on the right track here? Is this what's going on? Are we headed in the right direction? And so that's clarification. You want to show empathy. So you can't just reflect a feeling as a matter of fact. You need to have some empathy for your client. So empathy is, and we're almost at the end for a break here. Empathy is placing yourself in the client's shoes so that you can better understand the emotion, the struggle that they're feeling and experiencing. You're never going to experience the entire thing because the client experienced some trauma. You didn't experience that trauma, but you're going to do the best you can. That's why I never say, oh, I understand. No, you don't understand because you didn't experience what they experienced, but you're going to do your best. So I normally never say, oh, I understand. I probably don't. So, but I'm going to do my best to empathize, and I'm going to express that empathy to the client, So, I do that in different ways, depending on what the client says. I might say, oh, I imagine that was really difficult. I would have felt so conflicted, whatever it might be. But I'm going to show them that I'm doing my best to experience what they're feeling in the session there, that I'm present for them. So after I express empathy and it's near the end of the session, I'm going to summarize. So summarization is the longest. I'm going to go over all the main points of the session. Where do we begin? How do we get here? What's the deeper feeling to connected with an issue? Those are the skills. This is the checklist. It's really straightforward, but it's really hard to do. So the last thing I want to share before we take a break, and then we're going to practice. The last thing I want to share is the different domains. I mentioned these last week, but there's different domains in life where we experience these emotions and issues. The most common domain by far is relationships. That's what humanity's about, relationships. And, we find meaning through experience of other. And we have I, thou relationships, me and you. There is no me without a you. Who would I be without other individuals? And so there's different types of relationships in the relationship domain. There's our families of origin. Maybe they're still with us. Maybe they're not. Maybe we still have interaction with them. Maybe they're deceased. Maybe I don't talk with them anymore. Family of origin. They affected us for a long time. The second type of relationship is friends, social relationships. The third type is significant others, whether we have one, whether we don't. There's a reason. So that's relationship. There's three types of relationships that we can explore with our clients. The second thing is academics and careers. They're, in the same category. So everybody feels overwhelmed with academics and school. Everybody feels overwhelmed with work. When you put them all together, it's an awful lot. And that's something you're all experiencing as graduate students who study and work and go to class, and it's probably feeling overwhelming, which is a surface emotion. So we can explore those two areas in that domain, career and academics. The last one you're probably not going to explore, and that's our physical being, our physical welfare. I used to see a lot of clients that may have had a physical injury, an accident, something like that. We're probably not going to get into that too much, but you'd have to do a whole assessment to figure that out. But that's the third domain, our physical domain. All right, this might seem like a lot, but try to keep it simple. You go through the memorized part. And then what brought you here? Oh, I'm going to reflect. I'm going to look for a deeper feeling. I'm going to stay with that until I find one. Then I'm going to ask for a narrative. And then I'm going to paraphrase what they shared. Then I'm going to decide what domain they're talking about and ask for some clarification. Am I on the right track? And then if I still have time left, I'm going to look at other aspects of that domain. If they're talking about schools, we're going to talk about career. We're going to move to, if it's about control, I'm going to move to relationships. I'm going to connect the domains, see if there's a theme in people's lives. Oh, you fear failure in your academics, so it brings about anxiety. You also feel fear failure in work. Okay, so those are kind of connected, academics and career. How about relationships? You ever fear failure in a relationship? Rejection? Rejection is failure in relationship. So I'm going to see if these things, these domains are connected, and see if this deeper feeling, which is related to an issue, is a theme in somebody's life. That's where we're headed. Okay, so questions before we take a break. All right, we're going to take a 10-minute break. We're going to come back at 20 after, and we're going to break into partners and practice. So 20 after, come back.